Hello there. It is Friday evening. Just finished up a great session with one of our amazing PTs, Ariel, and so running a little bit later than usual, but hopping on here on a Friday evening to share some of my favorite things that we've been learning and doing here at Re+active this week. And I'm going to share a couple of things with you here. I'm going to start by sharing some of my favorite resources. So as you have likely heard, Brittany, Kim, and I have been putting on the finishing touches of our Cultivating Central Nervous System Connectivity course, which is our ultimate functional neurologic disorders course. It's a weekend course. It's got content before the course that's been launched, and I'm sharing with you right here one of the things that we just launched this week, actually, which is exploring autonomic regulation. Hey, Cassidy, thanks for joining me. Exploring autonomic regulation in functional neurologic disorders. And really what this is exploring it for ourselves so that we can help others explore it. So this is actually part of our pre-course training for the functional neurologic disorders course. And what you can see here is we're asking the therapists, the PTs, the OTs, the speech therapists, the doctors who are coming to consider this themselves, exploring these areas of autonomic regulation. So including breathing techniques, including the sleep-wake cycle. We know that's very important in autonomic function, fitness and cardiovascular exercise, emotional health, and mindfulness. So we ask all of us to explore these ourselves so that we can help other people explore them. This is really important to what we do. If we don't know it, we can't help people explore it. So, hey, Chelsea, thanks for joining. So I'm sharing with you a little bit of what we're doing in preparation for our Cultivating Central Nervous System course, and we've got 3 weeks of content. So in the first week, we really explored what it was to be a psychologically informed and mindful practitioner. In the second week, we're talking about autonomic regulation. So these key areas which really influence our nervous system in functional neurologic disorders. And then also this week, I have to share this one because it's probably my favorite. Again, Brittany and Kim put these all together. They're amazing. And this is sensory exploration. And this is really what I want to chat about today is what do we need to explore in functional neurologic disorders when it comes to the sensory world. And particularly in this part of our Cultivating Central Nervous System Connectivity course, you can see that we ask the therapist to explore this for themselves. So to explore visual input, olfactory, taste, auditory, vestibular, and somatosensory. So all the sensory systems and those things that they find both calming or energizing, or maybe actually overstimulating too, right? These are areas that we explore when we're working with somebody with a functional neurologic disorder. And I think in order to explore those with other people, we need to explore them for ourselves. Where do we lie in this? So this worksheet's actually for the therapist, for the physician who's taking the course to explore their sensory world and even consider kind of a sensory diet or sensory stimulation for themselves. So why is this so important? Why do we care about the sensory system in functional neurologic disorders? I'm going to share one more thing with you here. Well, for one, I see this across the board in people with functional neurologic disorders. There might be sensory deficits. There might be sensory processing deficits. And if I share this with you here, This particular article came out last year from the amazing Mass General group, and it was called Sensory Processing Difficulties in Functional Neurologic Disorder, a Possible Predisposing Vulnerability. I love it's an OT is the first author here. Love my OTs. We actually have our OT, Naoya Ogura, is going to be teaching as part of our Cultivating Central Nervous System course. If you are an OT and you work with people with functional neurologic disorders, I think this would be a great course for you because we're going to hit on these key pieces. Now, I'm not an OT. I'm not a sensory integration specialist, but boy, do we see this, and we see it in adults, we see it in kids, and this is something that we're getting better and better at screening. But essentially in this article, what they found as they did a retrospective look at people with FND is that they did have some sensory processing difficulties. And in particular, they have this really nice graph kind of comparing the different types that come out in the measurement of this. And you can see that people with functional neurologic disorders tend to be more than most people with low registration sensory processing, sensory sensitivities. No surprise there. There's a lot of sensory triggers for functional neurologic disorders. And then sensory avoiding. So again, no surprise there. We find a lot of people with functional neurologic disorders are actually avoiding certain sensations. Vestibular, somatosensory, vision are some big ones, but it can be others as well. So that's what they found in this study, is that some people with functional neurologic disorders tended to fit in these categories and actually have some difficulties with sensory processing. So what does this mean? One, we need to test it, right? So we need to test out their sensory systems, test out sensory processing. And number two, we better be treating it, right? So whether it's a predisposing vulnerability or it's part of the disorder, we don't know. So we need more research in this area. But what we do know, and what I've definitely seen, is that when we incorporate sensory assessment and treatment into what we're doing in functional neurologic disorder, it really changes the game. Now, not everybody has sensory deficit or sensory processing disorder with FND, but I will say that I find it, probably in about 75% of the cases. And it's definitely something that we can then incorporate into treatment education-wise. We can really educate the person for self-advocacy for their sensory environment. We can help them build a sensory diet. That's like one of my new favorite words, sensory diet, meaning what sensations, what sensory inputs do they actually need and what do they need less of? And having regular daily types of sensory input. We do a lot of graded exposure to sensory information. So particularly if a person is very sensitive to it, but it's part of their daily life, this is really big visually, right? So that becomes a graded exposure to vision information, for example. Environmental adaptation. So maybe you need to start with some sunglasses on, right? And then we can gradually be able to expose to more and more light. Now, this is really interesting. You may be wondering, like, didn't you just talk about autonomic? Now you're talking about sensory. Yes, we actually put these in our pre-course for our Cultivating Central Nervous System Connectivity course. These are both in the same week. And that is very intentional. Brittany and I chatted about this a lot because in our pie chart of things, we see these things separately. But as you probably have heard me say about our pie chart before, there's so much overlap between systems, sensory, motor, autonomic, right? And particularly when we look at the autonomic nervous system, our sensory inputs can really help modulate it. So for example, you may notice that if you do weighting, like a weighted blanket or a weighted vest or things like that, that it might be calming. It might be a parasympathetic regulator for you or for a patient. So that sensory input is calming to the autonomic nervous system. So they go hand in hand. You really can't have one without the other. I mean, honestly, you can't have any part of your nervous system without the other. They're so interconnected, which is why I love the brain, which is why I love functional neurologic disorders, because it's all about those connections. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. All this amazing work that Brittany Kim has put into our FND course. It's coming up next weekend, October 9th and 10th. It's live, but we also have the whole thing recorded. So all of these autonomic modules and sensory and motor control, all building up to the weekend course where we have, oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this. We've got our OT, Naoya, joining with us to talk through treatment for FND. We have Dr. Alan Wu from Northwestern joining us to talk through differential diagnosis, talking about the diagnosis and medical management. And we have Laura Ettinger, who's a pain specialist and particularly understands and looks at the underlying autoimmune or immune function and that neuroimmune overlap. She's amazing. And whenever I hear her speak, I'm just like, whoa. So those are all people a part of our course, and it's coming up next weekend, October 9th and 10th. So if you're interested in that, there's a link in our bio. It's the ultimate. This is like everything that we've got in functional neurologic disorders, all in a course. So you know me, you know I'm passionate about this and really want to get the word out to PTs, OTs, speech therapists, physicians, all healthcare providers to truly understand functional neurologic disorders. So help me share that mission. You can share this with them, share that course with them. We're super excited about it. So thank you so much for joining me tonight on a Friday night. I will see you soon and hopefully see you in our course next weekend. Have a good night.